Samantha Gray. This is my second informal speech, and this is my audience of 4. Alright, we're good. Alright, one of my favorite stories from growing up with 2 siblings is the time that my older brother called my sister a tart. I know this sounds awful right now, but let me finish. Our dad's baby brother was born with intellectual disability, and any mean words associated with the disability have always been very taboo in our house. You were better off running around dropping the F-bomb than you were dropping the R word. So when the small yet powerful word popped out of my brother's mouth, he knew he was in trouble. My brother quickly tried covering his tracks by saying, "I mean you're a tart, like a Pop-Tart." But my dad knew exactly what my brother really meant to say, and so he began to lecture my siblings on how horrible it is to use the R word so carelessly. This is one of my favorite memories for 2 reasons. One, it is pretty ridiculous that my brother tried convincing our father that he was actually trying to call my sister a Pop-Tart. And secondly, because my parents made sure to instill into our minds that it is not okay to say the R word, and it is never okay to make fun of someone with intellectual disability. Having a baby brother with intellectual disability made my dad sensitive to the word, but more people should be sensitive to the word. You see, no one understands how hard it is to watch someone you love have intellectual disability. And so I think those that do not understand it do not know how much it can hurt when people throw around the R word so carelessly. Since many people do not understand what intellectual disability is, I am here to explain to you what it is. Intellectual disability was once known as mental retardation, and it affects about 1% of the total population. There are different levels of intellectual disability, and the symptoms vary depending upon the severity of it. According to the ARC, intellectual disability is a below-average cognitive ability with 3 characteristics: an IQ between 70 to 75 or below, significant limitations in adaptive behaviors such as self-care and communication, and lastly, the onset of the disability occurs before the age of 18. WebMD states that the average IQ of regular humans without intellectual disability is around 100. So you can just imagine how much different it is with somebody with an IQ of 70 to 75 or below. The level of IQ and the level of support the person needs also reflect the severity of intellectual disability. According to merckmanuals.com, mild levels of intellectual disability are considered to have an IQ from 52 to 69. Moderate levels range from an IQ of 36 to 51. Severe levels range from an IQ to 20 to 35. And lastly, profound levels of intellectual disability prove to have an IQ of 19 or below. The level of support one needs is also an important measurement to determine the severity of intellectual disability. What I mean by support in this case is the assistance one needs in everyday life. According to merckmanuals.com, the support can be categorized into 4 different limitations: intermediate, limited, extensive, or pervasive. Merck Manuals also states that intermediate requires occasional support. These would be the individuals that you see at working at your local grocery store and things like that. You'll even see them at colleges and all that stuff. Limited support requires support in the form of a day program. Extensive requires daily, ongoing support, which they could still live at home, just their parents have to monitor them at all times. And pervasive requires support for all activities of everyday life, which include full-time nursing care. Although the level of IQ is an important factor, the level of support is the best way to measure the severity of intellectual disability. According to merckmanual.org, a person who has only mild impairment on an intelligence test may have poor adaptive skills that our extensive support is required. There can be many causes to intellectual disability, but according to parenthub.org, the most common causes of intellectual disability are genetic conditions, problems during pregnancy, problems at birth, and health issues. Genetic conditions include issues with genes passed down from each parent. As most of you know, when an egg and the sperm come together, they get 23 chromosomes from each parent, adding up to a total of 46. During the transfer, errors with the genes can happen, and sometimes they can get too much or too less genes. Down syndrome is an example of this. Those affected by Down syndrome have an extra chromosome, adding up to a total of 47. So problems during pregnancy can also result in intellectual disability. If a mother drinks alcohol or does drugs during pregnancy, that can greatly affect how the fetus develops. And an infection during pregnancy can also disrupt the full development of the baby. Issues such as malnutrition and preeclampsia are problems during pregnancy that often cause intellectual disability. Problems during birth that could result in intellectual disability include lack of oxygen during birth or premature birth, which oxygen is important no matter if you're a baby or if you're an adult. If you get an accident or something, an oxygen gets cut off from the brain, you usually result in some sort of brain issue. Lastly, health problems such as infections or injury could cause intellectual disability. According to WebMD, meningitis, whooping cough, measles, a severe head injury, extreme malnutrition, and exposure to toxic substances such as lead could all result in this debilitating disability. Besides those listed above, intellectual disability can occur in individuals who endure extreme neglect, which in many cases can cause an intellectual disability. I don't know if you're familiar with the case of the little girl who was trapped in her attic and her hands were tied to a chair from the moment she was born until she was about 12. When they found her, she had severe intellectual disability, and they believed that it wasn't something that she was born with. It was something that she developed due to extreme neglect from the people that were taking care of her. Although there's several reasons to why someone can develop intellectual disability, about 2/3 of those affected, the cause is unknown. So there's so many reasons that could affect it that a lot of them go unknown. My uncle's case was unknown. They thought that it could have been his premature birth, or the fact that my grandmother was in a car accident, but they never really put their finger on what had caused it. The signs and symptoms of intellectual disability vary greatly and are most commonly not diagnosed until a child reaches preschool. According to ParentHub.com and WebMD, the most common signs and symptoms of intellectual disability are learning how to sit up, crawl, and walk late, learning how to talk late, having problems speaking, there are difficulties with memorization, problems with understanding social rules, issues with recognizing consequences of actions, behavioral problems, and difficulties with problem solving or logical thinking. Most cases of intellectual disability are diagnosed before the age of 18, but the diagnosis of the disability depends on the severity of it. The more severe, the earlier the symptoms will appear. Besides the listed common symptoms above, many cases of intellectual disability come with other health issues such as seizures, problem with motor skills, and issues with hearing and sight. According to an article by AMW COPPUS, highly prevalent but frequently unrecognized health conditions such as vision, hearing impairments, obesity, epilepsy, skin conditions, and mental health problems all result as the issues that come with intellectual disabilities. My uncle is also another great example of this. At 2, he developed glaucoma and lost sight in both of his eyes. And that was just one of his many health issues that came with his disability. There are many types and levels of intellectual disability, but according to the article by AMW COPPUS, the most common include Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, phenylketonuria, Rett syndrome, Angelman syndrome, Williams-Beuren syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, Cornelia de Lange syndrome, Sanfilippo syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, and tuberous sclerosis complex. The life expectancy of an individual depends on the level of intellectual disability the person has. In the article written by COPPUS, it is stated that an individual with Down syndrome has an average life expectancy of above 50 years old. It also states that an individual with Fragile X syndrome has a life expectancy of 12 years less than the general population, which is about 70 years old. Since so many health problems come with the onset of an intellectual disability, the life expectancy of an individual depends on the severity. However, according to COPPUS, the life expectancy of an individual with intellectual disability has increased greatly from the 1930s to now. In the 1930s, the life expectancy averaged to be 9 years old, and while the average is still low, in the 1990s it has risen to 56 years old, and it has remained there. My uncle passed away at the age of 47 due to a heart attack. However, my uncle far outlived the expectations the doctors gave him. The doctors told my grandparents that he would not live past the age of 2. But with a lot of care and attention to his many health problems, my grandparents ensured my uncle would outlive the expectations that the doctors gave him. And they did. He did by a lot. Growing up with an uncle with an intellectual disability was hard. I watched how much it aged my grandparents and how much it consumed their everyday life. I watched how my uncle was completely dependent on his family and the constant worry of what if something happens to all of us. Even though it was hard to watch, I also learned so much. I now know what it's like to love someone with a disability. He taught my siblings, my cousins, and myself to take joy in the little things, like music. I know part of the reason that my siblings and I have such a love for music is from playing the Beatles endlessly for him or coming up with silly songs to laugh and dance to. Understand what it's like to sit back, relax, and do goofy things just so you can hear your uncle's contagious giggle. Really, all of us were blessed to have such a genuine soul in our life, and that is something a lot of people do not understand. It is more than a disability. It is someone's entire life, and many do not realize the impact it can have on someone. So next time you go to say the R word, take a second to realize what that word means to a person who loves someone with intellectual disability.